Hey everyone, I'm Casey, and welcome to the next First Impressions video, which are my very unscripted initial thoughts on Sherlock Season 4, Episode 2, The Lying Detective, and further proof at how bad I am at keeping a proper schedule. Yeah, okay, I know I said that these would be released the day after they came out, and then I do a proper review on Season 4 as a whole, which I'm still gonna do, but the reason this is a few days late is that I got sick. I've been under the weather the past few days. Feeling a bit better now, but it's still there. I'm still sick, so if I sound weird, that's why, because all the sick, it's all in my throat. But now on to my first thoughts on The Lying Detective, which is so good. Oh my god, this is such a good episode. This was great. This was so great. That's it. Okay, bye. No, because I'm gonna tell you my initial thoughts, but I can't wait to review this episode properly, because I need to watch this again and again to give this the proper analysis it deserved. This was such a good episode. Let's start with the premise and the basics first. Okay, so obviously this episode is going to pick up with the same kind of feel that the last one left with. How everyone's dealing with Mary's death. John is obviously not in a good place. He's seeing a new therapist and cutting Sherlock off from his life pretty much, and is even seeing Mary around and talking to her, just hallucinating her, really being around. It's not an unheard of thing in entertainment. This happens a lot. It's a trope I like. Don't have a whole lot to say on it. I do really like that we do get to spend a little more time with the actress, because not only was Mary written great in this series, she had a great actress, so it's nice to see that we got to see a bit more of her. I don't know if it's going to carry on in the next episode, because the end implies that he's starting to move on, or rather starting to try and rebuild himself again. But somehow Sherlock's in an even worse place. It seems like he's completely cut himself off. I'm not even sure he's left his flat for weeks until this one client comes along, who we'll talk about later, and he takes her out. The only people who seem to be around are Mrs. Hudson and Billy from His Last Vow. It was nice to see him again. I really liked him. I was worried we weren't going to see him again. He's cool. I hope that he comes back. But we realize later that Sherlock isn't just alone right now. He's in a very bad place. He has a really bad problem with his drug addictions and stuff. It's getting worse, and he has this real obsession over a man named Culberton Smith, played by Toby Jones. Now, Toby Jones, actually, for a second, I thought I only knew him as the Dream Lord in that one episode of Doctor Who, but no, he's Zola, Red Skull's right-hand man from the Captain America movies. I can't believe I didn't recognize him. And he is a really creepy villain. Like, this guy, I don't even know how he has such this, because in the episode, he's this big entertainment personality. He's rich, he's successful, everyone loves him, but you look at this guy, and he just screams like he's the villain. That's it. We all saw him in the trailer, we knew he was going to be the villain. Apparently, he has a part in the next episode, but I don't see how much further they can go with that. But yeah, he's rich, successful, and he's even using all these accusations Sherlock is throwing out into the public about him being a serial killer and a menace to society, for promotion. He takes Sherlock to a hospital for a bunch of kids for a commercial promotional gimmick. It's like, this guy, he was good. He's a good villain. And it brings up something else. Culverton has this long speech in the hospital about how, you can catch a criminal, but what happens when the criminal is a rich, powerful, successful person, someone who's seen positively in society? That's not a bad argument to make, but it also brings up something interesting. I saw a documentary once on Sherlock Holmes and his legacy through crime fiction writing, and it brought up the point that before Sherlock Holmes, there really wasn't a sense that upper-class people could be criminals. Usually criminals were seen as, like, the dirty-looking people on the street who grabbed your purse or held a banker at gunpoint. But Sherlock Holmes, since the beginning, has shown that even the most well-respected people could be despicable and underhanded and capable of the most horrible things. And that's really reflected in the show through Culverton, and done really well by Toby Jones. I really gotta give him credit. It's just an observation that I like that I don't think the show has done yet. Moriarty was more of an underground guy, and Culverton Smith is all over the place. Apparently this guy is huge, and he's also a psychotic killer. You know, it's common nowadays in fiction, but that's mostly because Sherlock Holmes, as a character, brought it to life. And speaking of the books, I mentioned in the last First Impressions video that this story is a play on the dying detective. And that carries true pretty well, but with an extra dose of feels that I wasn't expecting. Okay, so to go into detail, the dying detective is basically Sherlock Holmes tries to catch a murderer. I forget what he did exactly. It's been a long time since I read it. By letting him think that he fell for a trap that he set for Holmes, which was to poison him. So he puts on an act that he is dying. He doesn't eat for days. He's got extensive makeup on, but we don't know that until the end of the story. The entire time, we are convinced, and so are all the characters, that Sherlock Holmes is dying, and that's how he catches the criminal. And that's kind of the same thing here. Sherlock does excessive amounts of drugs, takes care of himself poorly, puts all of us in the public eye, partly to catch Culverton Smith, to bring him out and convince him to try and kill Sherlock too. And there's an extra sense of dread. In the books, Sherlock Holmes does starve himself. He doesn't eat for days to keep up the act that he is sickly, that he is dying. But outside of maybe losing a few pounds, the rest is done through makeup effects. Sherlock really is putting himself through this. He is checked by Molly. And except for that one time, we know Molly doesn't fake results. And she wouldn't kid about a thing like this. Sherlock has been damaging himself severely. He's been damaging his health and his mind so badly, not only to catch this guy, but to save John Watson. And that's one of the things I really, really like about this episode. Even for Sherlock to go to this many great lengths to catch a criminal, even if he is the most despicable criminal out there, to the point where he does almost die. He gets saved at the very last minute. Just to do that, even for Sherlock, that would be excessive. But he has an extra incentive to this. Okay, so apparently what we saw at the end of the Six Thatchers wasn't all of Mary's message. There was more. That she wanted Sherlock to save John Watson. We know that. But what we didn't know was that she explained how he could save John. And the only way to save John is to destroy himself, pretty much. And this has been a true bit of the show since the beginning, that these two would go the extra length for the good of the other. Let's be honest here, both of these two have very terrible self-preservation issues. They are really not good at putting themselves first, no matter what they say. But they will go to great lengths to save the others. We saw that in the very first episode where John shoots the cab driver. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but he shoots the cab driver when he's only known Sherlock for a few days. And now we come to this point where John is more furious with Sherlock than he's ever been. And it's not like in The Empty Hearse where it was justified. I mean, yes, it's understandable, but at the end of the day, Sherlock is not responsible for what happened to Mary. And John admits that at the end of the episode, but that doesn't mean it's not understandable why he felt this way for so long. But after he sees Mary's message and he realizes what Mary asked him to do, and he puts the pieces together of why Sherlock has been doing this to himself, not just to play a game and to catch a criminal, but to save his best friend from himself. And that's what he decides to do too. Sure, Sherlock is one step ahead. He does have an extra way to catch the criminal in case he does die, but he does hang on to the hope that John still cares about him as much as he cares about John, and that he'll save him, and eventually he does. And I know it's a thing we've seen before, and it was, again, in The Empty Hearse. We saw it there, too, where Sherlock almost threatens him with a bomb to get John to forgive him, and he does. And in a way, this ends with a laugh, too, but not as strong as one, because this could have failed. The bomb was deactivated long into Sherlock's speech in that episode, but in this one, there was only one way out for John to save him. He could have died. And it's amazing to see that extra mile from Sherlock that, for most of the show, has been shown to us as a cold, calculating machine, and what the show tries to convince us he is, and what Sherlock tries to convince us he is. But we all know that's not true, but it's nice to see moments of it. It's nice to see those moments of compassion that we know are there, that those moments of self-sacrifice. And before we go into the stuff in the ending, there is one thing, because not only do we see that there's a compassionate side to Sherlock, but so does Mrs. Hudson. Okay, before we go any further, Mrs. Hudson in this episode was badass. She is amazing. Like, okay, Sherlock has completely lost it by the time Mrs. Hudson gets involved, and whether or not he's playing that up, that was something else I was wondering. I don't know how much he's playing up his addiction and his influence, and how much of it is real. I mean, I know he was damaging himself health-wise very much. I just don't know how much he was psychologically. Because he could still deduce, he could still pull off amazing detective work, but that's probably saved for the review and I can go more in depth into it. But Mrs. Hudson, when Sherlock is apparently losing it, she gets to hold him at gunpoint, stuffs him in the trunk of her amazingly expensive car, and drives him over to John's therapist's office. And that was amazing. And when you ask yourself why she has this car and why she's able to grab a gun that quickly, she goes, and I'm paraphrasing here, she goes, "I am the widow of a drug lord, and I own property in central London, and for the last time, I'm not your housekeeper." So she's loaded. I don't know why we never thought she would be. That's a good point. I mean, the American that I am, I can't say for sure, but I'm willing to bet that property in central London is like having an apartment building in Manhattan. You know, you're probably loaded. And how much she knows Sherlock, like she's deducing his personality to his brother. You know, how sporadic he is, how when he can't find an answer, he just stabs it. She knows Sherlock is a very emotional guy, and that's just amazing. Like, it shows that Mrs. Hudson is more than we think she is sometimes. I mean, I know a lot of people like Mrs. Hudson, and I do too, but there's a lot of times where you just regard her as the landlady and not much else. But she was in sparkling point in this episode. It was awesome. And rather than analyze the entirety of the moment in the flat, when all of this is over, and Sherlock and John finally talk, probably for the first time since this has all happened, and lets everything out, especially John. Okay, the infidelity thing, it's over, and I'm so glad it is, because, God, I hated it. And John uses it as a way to grow. And I like that. Like, he admits to Mary that he wasn't who she thought he was. He wasn't this perfect, upstanding man, but he wants to be. And I really like that. And the hug. Everyone loved the hug. And yes, I went aw because it was sweet. You know, it was nice to see a friend comfort a friend. That's what it was. It is friendship. It always will be. You can have your fan in, but in canon, it's probably not going to happen, shippers. But it was still a nice moment. And again, a further sense of compassion from Sherlock that we really don't see that often. It's just, it was nice. I think that's all I can say in this first impression. It was nice. But there's a couple of bullet points outside the hug. You know, the hug was nice, but I don't think I could actually analyze it. Interestingly, Sherlock gets a text from Irene. That's really interesting, because except for that one moment, the sign of 3, I thought the show forgot about Irene. But she's still alive, and she's still out there, and she apparently texts Sherlock. I hope they bring her back. I really liked Irene. I really like the actress they picked for her. It would be nice. And it was a nice little callback. And the reason she's texting him is because it's Sherlock's birthday the day after all this happens. Again, nice little bit of information. Nice little bit of extra. Now, fans speculate that Sherlock's birthday is on January 6th. And I don't know if it was intentional for this to come out so close to that, because this aired on January 8th. It's a shame they couldn't find a way to air it on the actual day. That would have been pretty cool. But speaking of fan speculation, all that is nice. It looks like we'll slowly recover from the events of these episodes. It's the reason why it's good these episodes are 90 minutes long, because you can get so much done and so much character conflict and growth and development through, and it doesn't feel rushed. Obviously, there's still going to be scars, in Sherlock's case, probably literally, but it looks like there will be a slow transition to try and get things back as normal as they could be. Until the last couple of minutes, where John is seeing his therapist, and she slowly reveals that she was not only the girl who posed as Culverton's daughter and saw Sherlock that night, not only the girl who was flirting with John on the bus in the Six Thatchers, but she is Sherlock and Mycroft's long-lost sibling, Eurus. Alright, now before we go any further, before we go into speculation, I wanted to bring up the actress, Cyan Brooks, I think that's how you pronounce it. And I looked her up immediately after this was finished. I looked up who she was, because that was her in all the disguises and stuff, so she's a damn good actress. And I looked her up. As far as film and television credits, she doesn't have many, but she's a big theater actress, which probably explains why she was so good at flipping around roles. And another interesting tidbit, apparently a couple years back, she did a production of Hamlet with Benedict Cumberbatch. So that may be how she got the role. But yeah, super talented actress. And the thing about this reveal, it's interesting. And this actually is where I had to do my homework. Because, okay, ever since his last vow, and Mycroft mentioned, I don't get into that whole brotherly love thing, you know what happened with the other one. I never thought twice about that, but fans speculated wildly on what that could have meant. Like, oh my god, there's another Holmes sibling. Like, yeah, sure, okay, of course there is. And then there is. But throughout this episode, they expand on that more. Watson interrogates Mycroft for a minute when he realizes what he said. There's a notepad in Mycroft's office that says called Sherringford. Now, this was actually a bit of Sherlock knowledge I didn't know. I had to look this up because I was like, is this a book thing? So I looked it up. And apparently Sherringford was somewhat of a fan-made creation. Sherringford was originally what Sherlock Holmes was going to be called, but then they scrapped the idea. And in a play called Sherlock Holmes and Baker Street, there was a sibling mentioned called Sherringford, who was the eldest of the three and looked after the Holmes family estate or something like that. I have read Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street, but it was like in high school. It was like 6 years ago, so I completely forgot about this. But it actually shows that even way back in the turn of the century, nerdy fans like to speculate, because that's pure fan speculation. Sherringford is practically 20th century fanon, and that's kind of hilarious to me. And the only other thing of significance that I could find with Sherringford in it was this one Doctor Who audio drama where where the Seventh Doctor teams up with Sherlock and Mycroft to stop Sherringford from making a deal with some kind of eldritch horror or something. I don't know this thing, but I am totally ordering that audio drama on Amazon. I am totally doing that. But, okay, so what does this mean for the show? Are Sherringford and Eurus the same person? I think so. I think they are. What is her real name is yet to be seen. I'm not sure how I feel about a fourth sibling. I feel like that'd be pushing it. But here's some of my theories. Okay, so Miss Me. Eurus leaves a message for Sherlock, and it says, "Miss me." We all know what that means. So what I think is going on is that Eurus wanted to keep Sherlock in London. She didn't want him going away for whatever reason. So she sent out that message of Moriarty going, "Did you miss me?" Did you miss me? But why she's doing all of this and what her relationship with her brothers are is yet to be seen, but something I am utterly fascinated by because, again, Sherringford doesn't seem to be a typical thing. Not something that pops up very often. So there's not other adaptations to go on here. Unless Cthulhu suddenly shows up in Sherlock. I don't know if that'd be really dumb or really awesome. But the last note I'll leave on is I'm wondering, what does Sherlock know about Eurus? Because there's this weird vibe that Mycroft's the only one to have mentioned another sibling at all, no matter how cryptically it may be. And as far as I can remember, that's not the case with Sherlock. So, does he remember her? Does he know what's going on here? Because he's probably the youngest of the three. I don't know, it's very interesting. Really, this episode brought characters further and helped them grow a little bit and come out of the dark, only to be faced with many, many more questions that will probably be answered in the season finale, The Final Problem. Yes, they're doing The Final Problem again. Okay, Moffat, Gatiss, I love your work. You are great people, and I respect you greatly. But there's only so many times you can do The Final Problem. I know it's a classic story, but this is like the third time you have paid homage to this story. The Reichenbach Fall was perfect. We don't need any more. Just, I guess again, it'll depend on what elements they take from the story, because the thing they haven't done yet in The Final Problem I can only think of is when Sherlock ran away, kept running and running and running from the problem. In the book, the problem was Moriarty. And the problem here might be Eurus. You know, it's soon to tell, but all this episode has done for me is give me excellent character conflict, an amazing villain, some surreal imagery, like, jeez, and a lot of questions that I am very anxious to have answered. So if you guys have any thoughts or theories on Eurus or Sherringford or whoever she is, and want to discuss it further, or just what you thought of the episode in general, let me know in the comments. And I want to stress again that this is just rambling. There will be a full Let's Talk About when the season is over. But until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys for The Final Problem.